Yo, what's up? Dr. Swole here, MD bodybuilder, back with another video. Today I'm going to be talking about the best beginner split for bodybuilding. A split is basically how you set up your training for different muscle groups across the week, and it's something that I was confused about as a beginner getting into bodybuilding. So today I'm going to teach you how to decide what split you should be using and give you a few options to pick from if you're a beginner. If you're looking for weekly science fitness advice, make sure you smash that like button, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. Now, when you're trying to choose a split, the first question you want to think about is how many days in the gym do you need per week? And this is mainly determined by volume. Volume is basically how many sets you do per muscle group per week. A workout split is basically just how you organize your training volume in an intelligent manner across the week. And when you're choosing the number of days per week, you really just want to think about how much volume you're accommodating. If you don't need very much volume to progress, you may as well just do fewer days, just because it's going to be more practical and sustainable in the long term. There is planning and effort that goes into spending more days in the gym per week, not to mention the time it takes to get to the gym, pack your gym bag, and other things. So I'd recommend using as few days as necessary in the gym as possible. Alright, so how much volume should you be using as a beginner? You will hear 10 to 20 sets per muscle group thrown out a lot in the science-based community. This is sort of a broad guideline, but it's not something I'd recommend relying on. Ultimately, your volume requirements are going to be very individual, and you want to go for what allows you to progress the fastest. But in general, beginners should start with low volumes. There are a few reasons for this. First of all, as a beginner, you're very sensitive to the training stimulus. Your body just isn't used to going to the gym and lifting heavy weights. In fact, if this is your first time in the gym, you'll probably make gains even just doing a few sets per muscle group per week. And that's a good thing. The thing is, as a beginner, you don't want to overdo it. First of all, since your body is sensitive to the training stimulus and it's not adapted to anything, if you throw too much at it, you may not recover and you won't make progress. Your body has a limited amount of recovery resources that it can use to recover from training and also to make gains. So in some cases, less is more. You also run into chronic overuse injuries if you use too much volume too soon. Now, the other part of this is that you want to avoid adapting to high volumes early. Our bodies will adapt to our training stimulus when we apply something new. So if you throw higher volumes at yourself, you may adapt to it, even if it's more than you actually need for maximum muscle growth. The problem is that you're using up this tool of higher volumes early on. At some point when you get more advanced, you probably will need higher volumes in order to progress. And you want to have those higher volumes in your back pocket so you can use them later. Lastly, low volumes are just going to be more sustainable. The biggest reason why beginners don't reach their physique goals is because they just fall off the plan and they're not consistent. So I really want to promote sustainable training and finding something that fits into your lifestyle as easily as possible. The bottom line here is that beginners should be training with the least amount of volume that still allows them to progress at the fastest rate. Okay, so now that we've gone through volume, the next variable you want to talk about when choosing splits is frequency. And I recommend that you train each muscle group at least 2 times per week. There are a few reasons for this. If you actually look at the literature for bodybuilding, there actually isn't that much of a difference for low volumes between different frequencies. But there are some indirect advantages to training with the slightly higher frequencies that make me recommend it. First of all, you get more technical practice. As a beginner, you're new to the bigger lifts, and it makes sense to be able to hit those lifts more often so you can practice your technique. The next point here is that you get more mind-muscle connection practice. Mind-muscle connection is basically how well you can feel the muscle contracting during a set. And this is actually a very important skill for bodybuilders to learn. There is some early research correlating a stronger mind-muscle connection with better hypertrophy. And the more often you hit a muscle group, say biceps, across the week, the more practice you are going to have with this. Lastly, as you do train with higher volumes, you will get some advantage from spreading out that volume across the week. The idea here is that when you split up a large volume of training, you will be more fresh for each set overall, and you'll get more productive volume. The example is if you were going to do 10 sets of squats and 10 sets of leg press across the week, you'd probably do better splitting that up, doing 5 sets of each twice in the week, rather than just doing 10 sets of squats and 10 sets of leg press in one day. By the latter part of that mega workout, you probably won't be as strong and you won't be lifting as much weight for as many reps. Now, as a beginner training with low volumes, this may not be as much of an issue, but I do recommend getting into good habits early because as you become more experienced, you'll need more volume, and it's best to have these training infrastructures in place. Okay, so once you weigh out the volume and frequency side of things, I overall recommend that beginners should be training 3 to 4 days per week. 1 to 2 days usually doesn't really get you enough training volume, and beginners probably don't need to be in the gym more than 4 days per week. So let's talk about my favorite 3 to 4 days per week splits for beginners. Okay, for 3 days per week, my favorite bodybuilding split is full body. Let's talk about the pros and cons. In terms of pros, full body works really well with strength programming. Since you have 3 full body days, you can really fit in whatever lifts you want on those days. And this allows you to fit in some higher frequencies for your main lifts. Complex lifts like the squat and bench press often benefit from higher frequencies. And the thing is, as a beginner, strength and hypertrophy training actually have a lot of overlap. For example, if you train with a lot of heavy sets of fives, like 5x5 type programs, you're actually going to build a lot of strength and hypertrophy at the same time. As you become more advanced, you will need to use more complex programming in order to continue to see progress. But as a beginner, programming your main lifts in a strength-oriented fashion with some higher rep stuff built in will actually get you really good gains. Next, 3 days per week has really good fatigue distribution. Fatigue distribution is how you split up your training stress across the week. And in general, you want to spread out your fatigue as evenly as possible across the week. This will maximize your recovery and also allow you to be as fresh as possible for each session. Lastly, full body is just really easy to set up. It's very intuitive to just pick an exercise for each muscle group and fit that into a workout. Now, in terms of cons of training 3 days per week, first of all, you have long workouts. If you have to fit in an exercise for every muscle group in every workout, you need to spend more time transitioning from one exercise to the next. And especially if you're in a busy gym where you might have to wait for certain machines, this can be time consuming. Next, with full body workouts, you usually spend more time warming up. Since you're training all muscle groups in one workout, you'll need to warm up each muscle group before your first set. Lumping more training into fewer days does save a little bit of time in this regard. Since, for example, after you warm up for squats, you'll be mostly warmed up for subsequent quad exercises after, like leg presses. Lastly, with full body, you don't get as much of a pump. And this is just because you're not doing as many sets for one muscle group. In terms of who should actually do 3 days per week full body, first of all, if 3 days are enough from a volume perspective, then go for that. Furthermore, if you have strength goals, a 3-day full body setup is probably going to be the easiest for actually programming your strength training. Okay, moving on to 4 days per week, there are actually 2 splits that I would recommend to beginners. First of all, I want to talk about my hybrid split. And this is a hybrid between the Arnold split and the push-pull split. The Arnold split divides your body up into 3 days. Chest and back, shoulders and arms, and legs. And it's set up for 6 days per week. This, however, is very taxing for beginners who probably don't actually need 6 days in the gym per week. Push-pull is another common split, and that's where you divide up your body into pushing exercises, which would include squat type movements, so quads, chest, shoulders, and triceps, and then pulling type movements, which would include glutes and hamstrings, back, and biceps. My hybrid split is a mix of these 2 splits set up for 4 days per week. On day 1, you have quads, chest, back, and calves. And on day 2, you have glutes and hamstrings, shoulders, biceps, and triceps. And then you repeat these 2 days later in the week. In terms of pros and cons of my hybrid split, first of all, you get to train your shoulders and arms when they're fresh. I think this is a huge value add of lumping chest and back together and then shoulders and arms together separately. With a lot of common splits like push-pull legs or upper-lower, you train your shoulders and arms after your heavy pushing and pulling movements. And you won't perform as well if those smaller muscle groups are already fatigued. So this is a great way to make sure your shoulders and arms don't lag, which is a problem for a lot of naturals. Next, this split is good for antagonist supersets. That is, you can superset chest and back exercises together or bicep and tricep exercises together. This type of supersetting is just really time efficient, and I recommend everyone try it. Lastly, my hybrid split has good fatigue distribution. Since you train your lower and upper body in the same day, it balances out your stress throughout the week. Some people like having dedicated arm days in order to bring up their arms. The problem with something like a bro split is that you have very uneven training stress. Your leg days are going to be way harder than your arm days. I think that spreading out your training stimulus like this is better for overall recovery. Now, in terms of cons of my hybrid split, I think the main issue here is that you have leg training back to back later in the week. If you're training 4 days a week, for example, you might train on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday, and those Saturday and Sunday workouts are going to be back to back. And since you have quad training on one of those days and glute and hamstring training on the next day, you could run into some interference if you have really tough exercises back to back, like squats and deadlifts. You can get around this though by choosing your exercises wisely so that they don't clash. So overall, I think my hybrid split is going to be a great choice for beginners. Definitely think about the split if you want to prioritize shoulders and arms. All right, my other preferred split for 4 days per week for beginners is a modified upper lower split. And we'll talk about how to modify it in a minute. But upper lower is basically exactly what it sounds like. 1 day for upper body, 1 day for lower body, and then repeat later in the week. I think the split is great for beginners, largely because it's very flexible. Exercises on your upper and lower body days won't interfere with each other. So it's easy to put these days back to back, and thus you can shuffle the workouts throughout the week. This is especially good for someone who has an unpredictable schedule. Next, the upper lower split favors your legs. Your upper body has more muscles in it to train, so this split naturally lends itself to allow you to train your lower body more. If legs are lagging for you, then this is a good split to try. Lastly, upper lower allows you lots of rest between training the same muscle group. Training each muscle group 3 days per week, like we saw in the 3-day full body setup, can be tricky for beginners to handle, especially if you end up pushing yourself really hard on a certain session and you're sore going into the next one. So upper lower is a nice compromise where you're still training everything twice per week, but you get a good amount of recovery in between. Okay, let's move on to cons of the upper lower split. As traditionally written, the upper lower split has long upper body days. As we said, there are just more muscle groups to train in your upper body. Next, your shoulders, biceps, and triceps are going to be fatigued after your heavy pushing and pulling movements. As a beginner, you usually want to train your heavier compound movements before your isolation movements. So your arm and side delt work usually gets put at the end. And as we talked about earlier, you won't get in as much productive volume if your biceps and triceps are tired after doing chest and back training. So I came up with some modifications to the upper lower split, which will address these issues. Basically, you take your bicep work and move it from upper day onto lower days, and then you split up your side delt work to spread it out across all 4 days. This will address both of these issues. First of all, it evens out your upper and lower days. Because you're moving some of your upper body work onto leg days, your days become more even. Next, you allow yourself to train your biceps and your side delts when they're fresh on leg days. I actually use these modifications in my current upper lower split, and it works really well. So overall, I think the modified upper lower split is going to be a great pick. And in terms of usability, it's actually easier to implement than my hybrid split that we talked about before. That's all for now, guys. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like the video and leave me a comment below. In particular, which split did you use or are using as a beginner? Let me know. If you want to learn about my hybrid split, which I think is underrated, check out this video where I walk you through a full sample program based around this hybrid Arnold push-pull template. If you're getting value from my channel, make sure you subscribe and share it with your gym buddies so they can benefit from it too. See you next time.